Will, do you want to take it?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'll do a quick introduction and then I'll pass this off to Doug and John and Wyatt, who are on with us tonight from FCS. So we're kicking off the first of 3 meetings on a new 5-year utility rate study. Meeting 1 tonight will be water sewer rates. Then the next meeting, number 2, will be on March 8th, and that's going to be stormwater rates and SDCs. And then meeting number 3 is talking about affordability programs and how we can better utilize those to help low-income individuals. The rate plan that we'll be discussing picks up where the city's last 5-year rate plan that was adopted in 2015 leaves off. From FY 14-15 to the current fiscal year, rates increased by 46%. And this increase was necessary to start making substantial progress on our backlog of capital projects and also for debt service on our water line replacement that happened in 2013. During that period of time, rate increases were uniformly applied across all customer classes, residential, commercial, industrial, and without any regard to each user's proportional burden on the system. The rate plan that you're going to start to hear about tonight places much more emphasis on appropriately allocating the rate burden across user classes rather than overall increases to revenue system-wide. The plan you'll see only increases rates by 3% per year, but there's significant changes within user classes. The rates are designed, so tonight you'll see in water and sewer how rates are designed to slowly shift rate burden away from residential, which are paying a little more than their fair share, onto commercial industrial, which have been paying a little less than their fair share. But it's also done with an eye towards reasonableness and the amount of change that the system can assume. So what you're going to see is significant progress towards increased rate proportionality, but not perfect rate equity. And the purpose of that is to not see double-digit increases on our commercial customers year over year over the 5-year period. Meeting number 2, you're going to see a shift towards impervious surface as a measure of stormwater rates away from just meter size, which is a much more logical and directly correlated to payers' impact on the stormwater system. And then meeting 3 is where we really address ability to pay by bringing you recommendations how to improve our affordability programs. And then at the conclusion of all 3 meetings, city staff will bring back a resolution with these implementing rates effective July 1st. Based on the work that FCS does, as well as your direction that you give over these next 3 meetings. So with that, I will pass it over to FCS Group.
Well, good evening, Hood River. I'm Doug Gabbard. I am project manager with FCS Group. And I am joined today by Wyatt Zimbelman, who will be sharing the presentation with me, and Mr. John Ghilarducci, the project principal, who has done these kinds of rate studies in about 1 million other places. And so he'll be a tremendous resource to answer your questions this evening. Let me ask you, are you able to see my cover slide and my moving cursor? Excelente. So let's get into it. Some of the things that we're going to be talking about tonight, you're going to have a vague recollection of, and it's going to be a little vague because the last time we talked to each other was April of 2020. And so we're going to dust off the cobwebs and orient you to where we are in the larger engagement. We're going to talk about how we set rates, and then we're going to give you specific math for water and sewer, and we're going to step through the 3 parts of the rate study in some considerable detail. We are happy to take questions as they occur to you. Certainly follow whatever rules you normally follow for yourselves, but you won't throw us off if you want to ask questions in the middle. So that's totally up to you, and we'll conclude by talking about next steps. So we are wrapping this thing up, and I think Mr. Norris gave a very good exposition about what these upcoming 3 meetings are all about. And by the time that 3rd meeting is done, we will have this thing just about licked. Tonight we are talking about water and wastewater and the 3 parts of the rate study. Our first part is a revenue requirement analysis, which just looks at the size of the revenue pie and how big does it need to be. So a revenue requirement is the total dollar amount for any given year that you need to raise with rate revenue to give the utility the amount of cash it needs for whatever it needs to spend that on. Then we move into the second phase, which is the cost of service allocation. So now we're looking at slices of the pie. Are the individual customer classes paying their fair share? That is the question that we will explore in that segment. Finally, we're on to rate design. So once you decide what each customer class should be paying, you would be amazed at the amount of flexibility and choices that you still have to determine how that revenue is going to be recovered in different choices you have for charging that rate. So we're going to begin with the revenue requirement analysis, and I'm going to hand it off to Wyatt.
Hi, so for the revenue requirement analysis, we're going to take a look at a 10-year period of each utility's finances and come together with a rate plan to fund operating costs, capital costs, and then work with rates to meet those obligations. So we start with your budget for the fiscal year 2020-21 budget, and rate revenues from the most recent year we had of full, complete customer billing statistics. And then we're going to apply some annual cost inflation factors to those expenses. So for salaries and other operating costs, we're doing about 2%, and then for benefits, a little bit higher. And then for the rate revenue, we got a customer growth estimate from the city of about 1.4%. And so we're going to increase our rate revenue at about 1.4% a year. And then if there's any debt issuance needed for the rate forecast, we're going to have two sources that we look at. The first is an interfund loan from the city's equipment fund, which has some funds available for an interfund loan to either utility. And those would come in and be repaid over 10 years at whatever the investment earning rate is for the city, which is right now are anticipated to be somewhere around 1%. And then after that, we're going to look at revenue bonds, and those are incorporated in the forecast at an interest rate of 4% with issuance costs of 1% and then a repayment term of 20 years. So the first thing we're going to look at is the capital funding forecast for the water utility. And so going across that graph there, you've got each year's capital obligations. And in the light gray color, that is the debt that we are forecasting in each year, in several years, to help us kind of smooth the rate plan. So in 2022 and fiscal year 2025, we're looking at revenue bond issuances of $1 million. And then in 2028, we're looking at a $2.2 million revenue bond issuance. And that's to fund or help fund the $14.5 million there you have planned in capital for the water utility. And then once we've got an idea of what kind of debt service we're going to need and how much capital we're going to have to pay for, we do the revenue requirement forecast. So going across this graph here, you've got several bars that represent the different obligations of the utility. You've got your operating expenses on the bottom, your existing and then planned new debt service. And then at the top here, you've got some cash that's basically being made available for capital. So in order to fund all those costs, and right now your existing rate revenues more than cover your existing operating expenses. But in order to fund the additional capital plan, you're going to need annual overall rate revenue increases of 3%. And so that's for all customer classes. It's just the overall amount of revenue that the system needs to recover over the next 10 years. Then move on to the sewer forecast, capital forecast. And sewer is a little more front loaded. We're going to borrow, again, in 3 issuances every other year starting in fiscal year 2021. So this year, there's in the budget and a interfund loan from that equipment fund for about $1.5 million. And then in 2023 and 2025, we've included revenue bond issuances of $2.1 million. And again, same idea here. We've got our cash operating expenses and debt service, as well as the amount of rate revenue that we're going to make available for capital over the next 10 years. And again, just like water, the utility gets by with 3.0% annual rate increases, overall rate increases for the system. And we'll go back to Doug for cost of service.
All right. So Wyatt has described to you what the rate increases would need to be if we were going across the board. But of course, you want to go a little deeper than that and look at individual customer classes. And we're here to help you do that. So imagine the revenue requirement is this big pitcher of water, of cost that you need to recover in a given year. So we have a two-step process for doing a cost of service analysis. The first step is to pour those costs into 5 different buckets of functions that you see there for customer, meters and services, base demand, peak demand, and fire protection. And so we've gone through your budget, your fixed assets. We have assigned all of your costs to one or more of these buckets. And so all of your revenue requirement, all of the dollars will go into one of these buckets, and all of these buckets will add up to the revenue requirement. Well, once we do that, the next step is to take each individual bucket and dump it into all of the different customer classes that you see below in step 2, according to the degree to which each of those classes makes use of the individual function that we're pouring. This may make a little more sense in a minute. So what you're seeing here, these are the functions and the customer classes for the water, which is where we're going to start. So once we do that initial pouring of the revenue requirement, this is how the functional allocation shakes out. The vast majority of your costs are related to water use itself, which is allocated between base demand and peak demand. Think of base demand as just the average amount of water that is used in the system by customers. Think of peak demand as customers using a lot of water at the same time that a lot of other customers are using a lot of water. And it drives a lot of cost in the system, because if everybody's trying to use water at the same time, you have to have the infrastructure in place to meet, as one city manager I know says, we have the infrastructure and the pipes to serve the hottest day of the year. So on that hottest day of the year, everybody gets all the water that they want. The problem is that all the infrastructure is still around all the other 364 days of the year, and it has to be maintained and kept in good repair, even if no one is paying for any water coming out of it. So these are your customer classes for the water utility. Single family, which is by far your largest customer group. Your multifamily, which doesn't peak as much, relatively constant use, because a big multifamily development, if they have a lot of landscaping, they're likely to have an irrigation meter. You have commercial customers that covers a lot of ground. There's a lot of diversity in the commercial category. Industrial tends to be high volume, but pretty steady usage, so not a lot of peaking. But there is a whole bunch of peaking in irrigation. Of course, irrigation is the poster child for using a lot of water when others are using a lot of water. So we're going to take the costs from those functions, and now we're going to pour them into the individual customer classes. And the chart that you're looking at right now is the basis by which we do that. So for example, in the customer bucket, these are all the costs associated with serving customers. It could be putting together the utility bill and mailing it out. It could be customer service people to talk to your customers on the phone. And so those are the costs that would be in that customer bucket. And we're going to allocate those out to customer classes based on the number of accounts in each class. Likewise, the base demand class, which has a lot of the cost in it, is going to be allocated by class based upon annual use, whereas peak demand is allocated based on peak month use. Now, just to give you a flavor for this, notice irrigation, where base demand is a little over 40,000, but peak demand is 11,000. Well, those don't seem like very big numbers, but notice that peak demand is more than 25% of the base demand, which is the highest percentage that you will find here. Usually it's less than that. So fire protection is based upon fire weighted accounts, which looks a whole lot like the accounts under the customer function, except they are weighted by the fire flow requirement. So these are the allocation bases that we use to determine how much of each function goes into each customer class. And this is the result.
Doug, before you go on, could you go back
Sure.
to that last slide? I just
You
have
got it.
one question. Maybe other people are thinking this too, so I thought I should ask it now. When you say there's, for single family, 2,749 accounts, but then irrigation is only 59. Well, how does that work? Because people that are single family dwellings, a lot of them have irrigation, but how do we only get 59 for irrigation?
Oh, sure. So the irrigation line items are specifically for those customers that have an irrigation meter. In other words, that's all that those meters are for, and they are not hooked up to sewer. And so you see those in the field, literally. But yes, I'm glad you bring this up, because you do see single family residences, they water their lawns too, right? Except they're doing it based upon a single family account, which comes out of their single family rate structure. So there is sometimes, depending upon how much, and forgive me if I'm over answering your question, but for some people with a lot of landscaping or a ginormous garden, there is sometimes a trade-off to be considered between watering your landscaping with your regular household meter, and then having some of that, depending upon the time of year and your rate structure, some of that may show up in your sewer bill, which may seem unfair. And choosing between that and setting up a separate irrigation meter, which is added cost, but none of that goes to sewer. That trade-off may not apply to anybody in your situation, but we have seen that trade-off before.
I didn't even know we had that choice.
Well, it's usually not a great trade-off for most people, but depends how green your thumb is, I guess. So this is how the allocation works out. I want you to fix your gaze on the lower right-hand corner where it says positive 3%. Remember that 3% was the overall rate increase if we were going to do an overall rate increase. And the percentages above that by class are the individual adjustments to each class that would achieve that 3% overall change. So single family would actually go down 7%, multifamily down even further, and then other classes need to come up by based upon the cost of service analysis. Now, for a good before and after picture, I would draw your attention to the two pie charts above, where on the left pie chart is the way that you are recovering costs under the current rates. And the pie chart on the right represents the way the costs should be recovered based upon the cost of service analysis. And you'll notice that some of these adjustments there on the lower right side are they're significant size. And so it's my duty to let you know, if you don't already know, that what we're sharing with you here is a best practice. And I think there's a couple of really good reasons to adjust your rates to cost of service, but you are not legally obligated to do this. Some cities look at the results and they say thank you very much for that information, but there are trade-offs that we have made to, and we have the rate structure that we want to have, and we would just like to keep it, and that's perfectly legal. So but this setting rates at cost of service is a nice way to make sure that you are equitably applying the rates to those customers in proportion to their burden on the utility system. It's also a nice little hedge if you're going to have any unexpected changes in your customer mix, that you have a better chance of the right amount of revenue showing up if you suddenly have more or fewer of a certain class.
I have another question.
Certainly.
And I'm trying to, counselors, if you guys have some questions, I'm trying to watch the presentation, and if your hands, put your hand up if you have a question too. So on this, the irrigation one was the one I asked, and I didn't even know we had separate accounts for that. And of course, and it looks like they're the largest, could potentially be one of the largest increases. So since I didn't even know we had it, who has those accounts? Who has those kinds of accounts? Maybe Will could answer that question. I don't know.
Yeah, I can tell you categorically, I don't know specific properties in mind right now, but it's like churches, schools, people who have very large lawns. It's not your typical single family home. It's ones that have big pieces of property. And they obviously have complete control over how much they want to irrigate. But as Doug said, they get the benefit of not having to have sewer conjoined with their water bill. And also where everyone has to pay a base cost every month, no matter if they use water or not. And you're not able to just turn off your water meter and stop paying for the winter when you go down to, like if you go down to Mexico to go windsurf, we don't let you turn off your water for 3 months and then come back and turn it back on. But irrigation accounts do get to do that. They get to just turn on in the summer. So that's where it's for those parcels with a lot of landscaping, it can make financial sense for them to put in a meter specifically for irrigation.
Thank you.
So what you see here is one suggested way to implement a way to smooth the transition for implementing a cost of service rates. When you see the words implementation strategy, you should think, oh, there's probably a million ways to do this, and there are. So this is just one suggestion. This gets everybody close to cost of service within 5 years. You'll notice that no rates actually go down. And so our general approach to implementing cost of service, when some classes go up and some classes go down, what we like to do is we like to take the ones that supposedly go down, and we like to hold them constant, knowing that the inexorable upward pressure of the revenue requirement going up every year, because these are one-time shifts, but the revenue requirement goes up for many years. So we hold the ones that are supposed to go down, we hold them constant and use that to soften the blow on those classes that are going up. And we do that over a period of a few years, in this case 5. And then by the end of that 5 years, everybody is about where they should be. And then after that, the revenue requirement, what we saw as 3% kind of takes over, and everyone goes up the same amount after that. So this is a way to sort of smooth things out. That is the idea. So that's water. Now we're going to also take a look at sewer. I'll be able to go a little faster because all of these concepts work exactly the same way. We have a revenue requirement and we're going to do a 2-step allocation. The function names are a little different because sewer is not the same as water. And so we have customer, flow. BOD is a category of strength. It stands for biochemical oxygen demand. TSS is another measure of strength. That's total suspended solids. And sludge hauling. So these are the 5 cost buckets. And then we assign those to, or we allocate them to the different classes that you see below in the second step. So most of the cost of running the sewer system is about flow, but there is significant cost as well in the 2 strength components, TSS and BOD. These are your your sewer customer classes. The considerations are really quite similar to water. Septic and sludge hauling are a little unique. So the septic is a kind of separate kind of class where they're billed per gallon. These are for commercial septic haulers. You're not going to have any households with this category. And also sludge hauling, similarly, sludge that's hauled to the treatment plant from the neighboring communities. We're developing a rate for that as well. So how do we allocate? So you saw this kind of slide before, and this just shows how we go from the functional allocation to the customer class allocation. The customer bucket is based upon accounts. The flow is based upon the flow, which is not necessarily measured for every class, but we're able to estimate it using a technique called a mass balance analysis. And likewise for BOD and TSS, those are measured for some customers, but thanks to plant records, we're able to estimate those for all customer classes. Okay, this is the same kind of chart that you've seen for water. Begin at the lower right. Remember, we're going for an overall 3% increase, and to achieve an overall 3% increase, we're going to adjust each class in the way that you see just above that. So just like with water, we have some significant swings. Single family going way down. Other classes like industrial and sludge hauling and to some extent non-residential going up significantly. You'll see that the single family, currently you're collecting 58% of your rate revenue from single family. Based upon the analysis, it should only be about 37%. And so some key swings there. So how do we implement that? How do we take those wild swings and tame them a little bit? Now, I don't want to steal Wyatt's thunder here, but there is a consideration that is reflected here that we haven't talked about yet, and Wyatt will be talking to you about it, and that is the introduction of additional strength classes. And so I won't talk about it at length here, but I do want to draw your attention to this little 0, which probably looks out of place to you because you have plus 8% in the 4 years after that. And why is it 0 here for non-residential? The reason it's 0 here is because of the introduction of the new strength classes and the impact that has on the rate revenue. Otherwise, this is all pretty this is all pretty easy to understand. We can't, in order to get things fairly a smooth ride for everybody else, we can't quite hold single family constant, even though the cost of service allocations would suggest that they should be. We're juggling a lot of balls here, and as with any implementation strategy, this is just one way to do it. All right, so having stolen a little bit of his thunder, I'm now going to pass this back to Wyatt to talk about the rates, because you haven't seen any rates yet.
Thanks, Doug. So this is the existing structures for water and sewer. And on the fixed fee side, they're very similar. They both utilities, you're going to pay a monthly base fee based on the size of your meter. So if you have a larger meter, you're paying a larger amount per month. And then you're going to be charged in some form for your usage. On the water side, there's two types of charges. There's a commercial charge, which you pay for all of your usage. You pay per 1,000 gallons. And a residential charge where you only pay for the usage that's above 5,000 gallons. So you basically get an allowance each month of 5,000 gallons, and then you pay the $2.56 per 1,000 gallons. On the sewer side, residential customers actually do not pay any sort of use fee. So residential customers just pay the monthly base fee. And then you've got a series of non-residential, industrial, and then sludge and septic use charges. So for non-residential customers, there's 3 strength categories: low, medium, and high, based on each customer's estimated BOD strength. And between those classes, the lower strength customers will pay less than the high strength customers. The permitted industrial users is, oh, sorry, Doug.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, there's a couple of significant industrial users, and those customers actually have their BOD in solids measured. So they're going to be billed per pound on those loadings. And then we have our sludge and septic haulers, again, who pay either per pound for sludge or per gallon for septic. So now as we go and evaluate creating a new or updated rate schedule, there's a couple important factors. The first one is that whatever rate structure you make needs to basically collect the overall revenue requirement, or whatever revenue requirement we're targeting. That's the number one consideration, is that whatever we do with rates, we need to make sure we collect the amount of money we said we would collect. The next step is then to try to target some of those phase-in revenue requirements that we looked at. So in that phase-in schedule, where different customer classes are receiving a different rate increase, there would then be a corresponding amount of revenue that we're trying to get from each class. So that's the next step, is we're trying to then kind of target whatever rate structure we get to make sure each customer class pays the amount of revenue we said they should pay. And then the third option is just within that, how do we want to structure these rates to meet the goals of the utility? And that can be focused on encouraging conservation, or maybe doing the opposite, to try to keep revenue as stable as possible. And so for this, we worked with the city on coming up with what we thought would be appropriate. And the general consensus was that the existing rate structures worked pretty well, but there are a couple improvements that we wanted to look at making. So on the water side, the plan was to just kind of hold our base fees flat, and then look at kind of expanding our bringing in our cost of service shifts through the volume charges by expanding that commercial charge into a larger, more spread out class that has, a commercial rate, an irrigation rate, industrial rate, so a different rate for different customers. And then on the sewer side, like water, the plan is to kind of keep our existing base fee structure unchanged, although with some slight increases to it. But the real changes are going to come on the volume charge on the use fee side. So the big changes here being pulling multifamily out of the non-residential class, and then looking at expanding those non-residential strength classes that you have. So we'll start with water, and this is the rate structure that we landed on. It'll look familiar because it's almost the same as your existing structure. The change that we did make, like I said, is that we're just going to take that existing commercial charge, which was, I believe, $2.56, and we will split that up into 4 different charges, one for each customer class, for multifamily, commercial, industrial, and irrigation. Each one of those classes whose cost of service is going up at a different rate, paying a correspondingly higher rate. And then this table will show you kind of the breakdown of where your rates are now in 2021 and where they'll end up in 2022 when compared to a few other utilities in the area. And also just kind of keep in mind too that whatever changes we implement, we're not always sure what these utilities are doing. So they could be in the process of doing their own series of rating, and often are in the process of doing their own series of rate increases. So this is a snapshot of where we are now, but is not necessarily reflecting where things are going. So on the sewer side, The big change is going to be expanding the strength classes. So right now, there are 3 strength classes, low, medium, and high. The idea with this new structure is going to be expanding that and really creating some more classes on the high end, that being super high, and also kind of moving that high class up to be a little higher strength to help us better capture some of the different customer class, some of the higher strength customers, rather than having them all grouped into 3 classes where you might have some very different types of customers. You know, the benefit of expanding the structure is that you can get a little better differentiation of customer types and make sure they're paying a rate that reflects their strengths. And so just to give a couple examples, a low strength customer is going to be something like a coffee shop, a hospital, restaurants, a medium is bakery or meat shops. A high would be something like an industrial laundry. And then super high is generally going to be breweries, distilleries, that sort of thing. So this just kind of compares where we are now with the low, medium, and high structure and where you would be going under this proposed expanded structure. So right now, the high strength class caps out at 800, or begins, I should say, at 800. So anyone with a strength or assumed strength, we don't know exactly what each customer's strength is, but the assumed strength by customer type will pay the highest strength rate if they have anywhere above 800 milligrams per liter of BOD concentration. Under the new structure, that would be expanded, and you would have quite a few more classes there on the high end. So you can make sure you really get those customers who do have high strength into an appropriate class, but that has the benefit of, as you can see now, you know, about 19% of the flow is billed at the high rate. Under this new structure, most of those customers are actually moving down into a low or standard class. And it's just going to be those very high strength customers who are going to be paying the highest strength rates.
Wyatt, this is Kate.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about these different strengths. So are the strengths actually measured at the pipe of those businesses so they know exactly what they are?
So no. Generally speaking, that is not something that a utility is going to have information on. There are general guidelines on what a certain type of customer, what their strength most likely is. But the only customers whose actual strength is measured are the couple significant industrial users that are in the industrial class. So this lays out what the new structure looks like. Everything on the left is going to be familiar. That's your existing, very similar to the existing base fee, just slightly higher. And then on the right, we've got our kind of broken down non-residential charges. Again, we're moving from a low, medium, high to a more expanded standard through super high. And then multifamily is going to be now in their own class.
Excuse me, I have a question about what you just talked about with Kate. Is that okay, Kate?
Sure, Mark, go ahead.
Basically, did I hear you say that we don't know what the BOD and TSS contents are from non-residential and industrial users?
You do know for the most, those customers that are in the significant industrial user program, but for all other commercial customers, no, that's not something that the utility has.
Then they just automatically fit into standard then? Because otherwise, how do you know where to put them if you're not measuring them?
Yes, if you go back a slide.
Jump in on that real quick.
Yeah.
So what it's based off of kind of a standard understanding of the business. And what we're queuing off of, I'm going to share my screen real quick, is the City of Bend. So they updated their strength categories in 2015. Ours are much less detailed than this, and we last updated ours in 1996. So this is moving up to more of the state of understanding of what these impacts these businesses have on the system. And no, the only businesses right now that get their treatment actually measured is people who like Full Sail and Ryan's Juice that are on a major like national distributing level of flow and going through there. And that's really and they have to take, they sample it, use a sampling methodology. It takes a chemist to evaluate it and they turn it in and we have to monitor them. It's a very big process, just not feasible for all of our commercial accounts to do that. So what we need to do is just stick to industry best practices and standards about, we know that, for instance, a gas station produces much less impact on the system than a laundry or a brewery. And so we just have assumed strengths based on these standards.
Gotcha. And I see coffee shops in 2 different places on this table. So
It is, yeah. I need to contact the city of Bend to see when coffee shops end up on one versus the other.
And then my related question was if being in super high incents somebody to add pretreatment, does that not end up in a revenue reduction in that they then qualify for a lower thing? And do the calculations sort of account for that possibility?
I'll let Wyatt answer a piece of that, but I will say that, yeah, we have already thought through if there's significant on-site mitigation, then we would review that with our wastewater treatment plant operator and our city engineer to see whether or not that should give them like a step down category.
And then I assume that would be in our best interest as well. If they get a lower rate and we don't have to digest as much stuff.
And we really, if you go back to the account numbers, it really is a very small number of properties that are high or super high.
Did I miss that?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. I think this is where we left off.
Indeed. So like water, the 2022 rate, so once we've made these changes, and changes to the residential class are not as crazy, not as large as the changes to commercial and industrial and so on. But this is where the 2022 rate would shake out. And again, this is a situation where we don't necessarily know what everybody else is doing over the next few years.
Right. Thank you, Wyatt. All right. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our time together, especially because you're going to see us 2 more times in the next 2 weeks. So in our next episode, we are going to show you the stormwater analysis, and that is both the revenue requirement, so the overall rate, but as applied to the new impervious surface basis. We're also going to show you how a stormwater credit policy could work and the rate implications of that. And we'll also talk to you about the stormwater SDC and how that should be adjusted. The week after that, I will be bringing Todd Chase, my fellow Oregonian, to talk about the affordability analysis, and that will wrap it up for this engagement. Happy to continue the conversation and answer any questions that you may have.
Megan?
Yeah, I have one to two questions, but for sewer, it's total flow. Did you guys do anything to account for the potential like intermittent nature of some of it and how that impacts the wastewater treatment plant operations? I'm thinking through, and this might be background that doesn't mean anything to you, but when we had our odor issues because of septic, kind of doing a slug all at once because they're offloading the truck and then they're going on with their day. And that was creating some issues for bacteria to suddenly handle a huge slug at once. Is that covered in your calculation?
Wyatt, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'd say no. For this analysis, we don't really have access to or don't incorporate any sort of, I guess, measurement of peaking, kind of like we do on water, where we look at peaking. On the sewer side, everything is really based on annualized average flows and loadings.
They will pay a larger share of treatment because that is very, very high, high strength suspended solids. So they'll pay based on their volume and the treatment required. So they do pay for their impacts, just not the peaking or intermittent nature that you described.
I'll add too, working with FCS was constantly reminded that they can set rates for anything that we can give them an estimated cost for. So for instance, with sludge haulers, we could isolate that their costs are really in the drying and biosolids and spreading side of it because it already comes treated. So we didn't apply any treatment cost to that sludge that came in. So we could really delineate it that way. For the septic haulers, that odor control project is already done and completed. So it wasn't in the 10-year, outlook of capital where we could say that project right there is because of septic haulers. It's already completed. And in fact, I think the Urban Renewal Agency ended up paying most of that anyway. So it wasn't even too much of a burden on ratepayers, if that helps clarify it anymore.
Okay, thank you. And then my other one is on kind of the 5-year step changes to sewer rates to get the different customer classes, closer to their actual cost allocations. I guess one big picture, I for both sewer and water, I really like this analysis of who's maybe responsible for the costs. But I'm wondering with so single family was found to be what 58% of current cost allocations, should only be 37% of cost allocations. But this 5-year step still shows it as where it's the other sheet, but 52% or something. And so I'm wondering why we are increasing costs for single family. I get not going backwards and going down, but why are we not holding steady given the kind of pretty large out of whackness?
You could do that. So as with any implementation strategy, there's a million ways to do it. And so we could hold single family constant, for example, and give other classes a less smooth ride. The reason we didn't do it that way, and I'm not saying you should not do it that way. The reason we didn't do that initially the first time is there will be a few customers that because of the expansion of the strength classes are going to get hit rather significantly. And so that was in our minds and in our conversations with staff, and that's what we were all trying to balance. And reasonable people will balance it different ways. So you could absolutely do it that way.
I'll chime in too that was absolutely at staff direction to hit that balance. And some of the reasons behind that is we have just come off of 46% rate increases across all users. And so looking at what that meant as far for industrial and non-residential, when they're already, you can see right there, getting after 46% rate increases, another 5 years of very hefty rate increases. We wanted to strike that balance. And then also with ability to pay, for single family, we are going to hopefully expand to get much better penetration with our low income discount program. And so that should be quite helpful for residential folks if they don't have the ability, if it's going to be a hardship to them to contribute this.
And that'll be in the third meeting that we have, Will, that we'll be talking about that part.
Correct.
We're not, as I understand this, Will, since this is a three-part thing, we're asking questions about this, but we aren't making a decision on this tonight. We'll be making a decision later after we get all the presentations and have some.
Correct.
thinking
Yeah.
about it.
If there's something that we should be working on though between now and adopting final rates, that would be good. But I think there is some value to seeing the full context of the storm and the affordability piece before making really any final decisions, because it really, you know, what people pay at the end of the day, what they care about is that bottom line bill. And so seeing everything in context, I think would make sense.
Mark?
Yeah, thanks. There was a 10-year capital guesstimate, capital improvement guesstimate, and then a 5-year rate adjustment. Does that, are we saying that the next 5 years would be inflation only and we've finished doing the corrections, or is this, would it a similar ramp continue in the second 5 years?
Oh, I appreciate the opportunity to clarify that. So the implementation, this phase in, and what I'm addressing here applies equally to water and sewer. The implementation schedule that you see here is limited to the years that you see. Now, after this period, there are still the revenue requirement increases that are largely 3%, and those would apply then across the board.
Gotcha.
See, in theory, adjustment to cost of service can happen all at once, and then in the following years you just have the revenue requirement increase applied to everybody across the board, and we are relaxing that assumption here.
Megan?
Sorry, if I could just dig into that a little more of, you know, so we're doing this 5-year phase, but we still haven't actually achieved the allocation of customer classes that match your pie chart on the previous page. Where, you know, where single family and residential should actually probably be switched for percentage of total. And so should we be doing like another 5 years of phasing to get to that allocation?
That's a great question, and the answer is there's a lot of different ways to do it. You can continue the phase-in period to get dialed into those allocations even more closely. You can be way more aggressive in the first 5 years, and we've kind of explained why we did not do that in the first cut here, but there's a lot of ways that you could do this. So most of your rate design questions that begin with the phrase "could we," the answer is typically going to be yes. It's because there's just a lot of ways to do it, and this is just one.
Does anyone else, let's see, Tim had your hand up, and after Tim, Eric.
Thanks, Mayor. I think this is a question for Will on, if you could go to slide 31.
Did I hear 3-1?
Yep.
You got it.
Is that the one? I'm sorry, I'm page 31, slide 27. So sorry.
Slide 27, you got it.
So this is kind of a similar question to the one about the sewer charge, in that the cost of service adjustments were one thing, and then there was a decision to kind of spread that over the variety of different classes. And it really, I'm just kind of curious about what the rationale is. I mean, for one, the irrigation was like, it was supposed to be like plus 103% or something. It turned out to be much less than that. So I'm just looking for kind of like what the thought was behind the spreading of the classes.
Sure. So just to clarify, what you're looking at here is the first year of implementation.
Mm-hmm.
So it is the first year of how far am I going back here? It's the first year of this.
Mm.
Okay, so it's not the full It's not the completion of the implementation. So all of our comparisons are typically done with everything we show you is really based upon the first increase that you have to implement. But this should be considered part of a 5-year schedule. So this is just the first installment.
So I guess a follow-up to that are the increases going to actually reflect the cost of service adjustments eventually?
Yes, but gently, which is the whole point of an implementation schedule.
Sure.
So there's always going to be some compromise between the equity of somebody is not paying precisely what they ought to be paying versus trying to smooth things out.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, I believe there's a slide in there that shows the what rate impact should be if it was perfectly cost of service, and then what it will be after this 5 years. And we get pretty close to perfect with water. We still have quite a bit to go for sewer, but it's just because that is so much more out of whack. But you know what we're doing right now is a compromise that gets us closer, makes incremental progress. And then there's nothing that says we can't continue to make that progress after this 5-year period.
Sure. Thanks, Will, and thanks, Doug.
You bet.
Eric, did you have a question?
I did. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for this presentation tonight. I wish all of our policy questions could be resolved in reference to just good math. It's not always the case, but it seems to be the case tonight. Here is my question, and it has to do with what I'm seeing as maybe another strength class or user class that at least exists in my mind, and it's the one after super high. I might call them super high violators. In other words, those who actually might, in violation of our local codes or state or federal environmental regulations, overuse the system and place our precious sewer treatment facility on the river at risk. When that happens, or if it were to happen, that I would imagine could result in DEQ fines, but then they take that money, but we're left with our plant and what might be a sort of an insurgent maintenance problem because such and such did this or that. And I guess, and maybe this goes beyond the four corners of a rate analysis, but I'm just wondering from a rate setting perspective, and maybe it's already baked in because of some kind of maintenance pot that gets funded here, but how do we address that kind of super user who might wreak havoc by some super event that, and then maybe they're not even solvent to pay for?
There might be many voices who want to get in on this, so I will just begin by pointing out that there's pricing and then there's enforcement, and so if we're talking about violation of the law, illicit discharge, then that's something that requires enforcement. I will let others get in on that if they want.
Yeah, I'll contribute that. So our wastewater master plan is inclusive of everything that we need to build in order, we think, to operate a stable and safe, responsible system over the next 10 years. And these rates are what's going to support that capital improvement program. And what we also bake into those expectations is that we are going to investigate, fine, and stop anyone who's dumping caustic materials into the system, and that's really civil enforcement, and we do that, and we are improving our systems to monitor and help us find where anything gets dumped into our system with improved monitoring over time.
So, Will, if I'm understanding them correctly, the city actually does that. So we levy the fines. So if DEQ did it and they took the fines, we wouldn't have funding to then fix whatever was happening.
Yeah, so if we dump into like the Columbia River, we get a fine. If we find someone dumping into our system, then we fine them. And without getting into details of it, we do that, and it has been done. Like it has been done in the past.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. I know it was a little off topic, but it came to mind. Thank you.
I've got one more question. In the capital funding forecast, we've got $20 million worth of projects for the next 5 or 6 years. And the sewer pipe that is elevated under the freeway, is that in the list?
I believe so, but I think City Engineer Wade Seaborn is on.
Yes, that is the Mount Hood lift station for 3.6 million.
Oh, that's what they call it. Okay, thank you. I'm like, gosh, I sure hope that's on the list because I know it's really important. I didn't know that's what it was called. Thanks. Any additional questions from anyone? All right, I don't think so. Thank you for the presentation. That was fantastic. That was clear and succinct, and really appreciate all the work you've done to figure out all of these things for us. Quite a bit to think about, but it seems well thought out and easy for us to follow. So we're looking forward to you guys coming back. Thanks so much.
We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Okay.